episode of the Out Here Show, talking about mapping food sources, and then we're also continuing our conversation with Zach Ferenbaugh of the Hunting Public. I have no idea, it's like part 3, 4, or 5 or something right now. Have a lot of information from Zach, so we'll start with our talk with Zach Ferenbaugh of the Hunting Public. You have some questions you said you've always wanted to ask Zach related to hunting and different things. So What questions you got? So my one big question, Zach, is that you know Brody, you hunted with him for a whole fall or whatever. You know me just a little bit, but we're pretty non-aggressive, cautious hunters. So feeling like and feeling like we don't get that many opportunities and not wanting to mess it up. So how do we break that habit? How do we, I feel like you have a great sense of knowing when to be aggressive, when to hold back, and timing and all that stuff. So how do we break that habit and tell ourselves to be more aggressive? And you kind of answered it actually a little bit before, where you said, like, we're only hunting on the weekends, so why not be aggressive? We don't have that much time. But how do we break that habit? That's my goal for this year. So I just wanted your thoughts on that.
So I think that's a really great question. I think that the best thing that you could do is you could say, okay, like, you can just break down your, break down what's been going on the last few years. Like, are you reaching your goals? If you are, then, what does it hurt to try to be a little more aggressive? If you're not reaching your goals, what does it hurt to try something new? I guess it's one of these things where it's like, if you're being successful, and, like, I think of, like, the situation of a guy that, he kind of goes out and he's got some spots. He's got a preconceived idea of, like, where he's going to go, gets out there, sets up, maybe he grinds it out and just throws enough, like, time into it that eventually in the season he gets an opportunity or two. What's more realistic, is like one opportunity a season, so it's like, if that's the situation, it's like, okay, if it's about throwing a bunch of time at it, and then, like, sometime in, like, the rut or in the rifle season or something, you get that opportunity, it's like, what does it hurt then to just, like, throw a little more aggression at it? Like, what does it hurt to change it up and, like, knowing that, okay, it doesn't really matter, it's just kind of about putting more time into it. That's one way to look at it. Another thing is, like, if you're doing those things, you're not getting an opportunity, you just, like, feel like you're banging your head against the wall. It's like, what do you got to lose, really, at that point? And, like, that's kind of where I was, where it was like, or maybe even somewhere in between. In 2016 and 17 are very good years to kind of explain how I kind of got out of doing the same old, and started being super aggressive. It was like, okay, I'm hunting 2016. I hunted my butt off in 2016. I was filming Bill Winkie at the time. He shot about on November 10th, and I hunted basically every day from November 10th until November 19th, when I ended up shooting a buck. And I was sitting in tree stands. I'd be sitting there all dang day, man, like, just grinding it out, like, wearing myself out. And it was just kind of an effort thing. 2017, kind of the same deal. It was like going into these spots and, like, halfway setting up on the ground and, like, halfway, hanging and hunting, and I'm just, like, still not fully satisfied, I guess. I still, like, didn't feel like I'd hit a stride yet, and I wasn't feeling like I was getting a ton of opportunities. I ended up shooting a buck on November 13th, but that was after spending all of October. And I get shot the one on in Nebraska, but then shot and hunted Iowa all of October and on November. Didn't get an opportunity until that would have been November 13th, I think. Anyway, it just felt like I was stagnant. I was just kind of doing the same thing every year, kind of going through and just doing that same thing where, like, I'd hunt different spots and get a different view, but I wasn't necessarily, like, even really getting out of a comfort zone. It was like, well, I'm going to set up on this transition line, and that's kind of the extent of it. And it wasn't until 2018 that I really started to kind of feel it a little bit, where I was like, okay, I'm starting to mix it up. I'm starting to do more still hunting. I'm starting to get to a point where I'm understanding where, I want gonna just kind of chill out here and just glass. And then 2019 it got, you know, significantly increased, and then 2020 it's just like, and I'm just like a wild dog out there. Like, you never know where I'm gonna end up. You know, it's kind of just like I feel at home, you know, just kind of being aggressive, moving around, trying to get eyes on something, and then just making a game plan real quick. And I think kind of that mentality though is like, I had to just say to myself, like, you want to do something different, you want to try to get more opportunities, then you got to just like try to do different stuff, because what you're doing is, I mean, that's all it was every year. It's just like put a bunch of time into it, hang and hunt, set up on transition lines, try to get close to bedding, blah blah blah. I mean, that stuff works, but it was like when I really started to be like much more like loose with everything and not have as much of an agenda, it just helped me kind of just take every situation and just make a decision right now versus trying to make, like, I think what a lot of, especially with whitetail hunting, what a lot of folks fall into this category, and I was there, is you have this plan and you think it has to work exactly like the plan. And, you know, if you throw a bunch of hunts, you know, 10 to 20 hunts at it, yeah, eventually one of those plans probably is going to work for you to go and kill a deer. But it's like, if you want to increase those odds, I think you just got to be able to go with the flow, see a situation and say, hey, I'm going to try this. If it doesn't work, then so be it. What am I out? Because, like, you know, 9 times out of 10, you're wrong anyway. The plan didn't work out. So I think, you know, just having the confidence of putting yourself into the game, being a little extra aggressive. You know, if one's there, push it. See what you can get away with. You know, like, what do you have to lose? That's ultimately what it comes down to. It's like, what do you have to lose? And I think when it's like, you know, it was a pretty special one. And that buck in Nebraska I shot in 2018 was like the first time that it was like, I just saw something and it just made a decision, just made a move on it. And it's like, since then it's happened quite a bit, but it's like, I guess it just was one of those things. I thought to myself, like, what else am I gonna do? I mean, I could come back tomorrow, but then start getting this what if. Like, I know he's there right now, and it's like, it's really just up to me to put myself in a position to where I'm either going to crawl in and get a shot at him as soon as he stands up, or I'm going to crawl in and I'm going to get close enough to where I'm in his bubble and he just makes a mistake. I'm going to do whatever makes sense, but, like, you know, kind of just seeing that. And then again, it's like, what do you have to lose? Tomorrow, you got a lot to lose. There's a lot of what ifs if you wait till tomorrow, or if you wait till this evening, or, you know, you wait till next weekend. It's just like, you see that opportunity, take it. Like, one thing, kind of hitting on that pet peeve thing is like, one pet peeve I have is like, if you see a big buck that you want to shoot or a deer that you want to shoot in general, like, go get him. You know, it's like, he's there for the picking. Like, it's one of the hardest things in hunting is to see a big buck or your target animal, right? I mean, even if you're taking it a step back and you're not talking about big bucks, like, if there's a doe and she walks past your setup or your tree stand or set up on the ground, either way, she walks out of bow range. Well, it's like, wouldn't you know which way she went? It's like, just maybe go over there. You know, maybe, but like, you know, there's no real rule, and I think especially when you're talking like more target specific, like hunting a buck. It's like, if there's a shooter that goes by, it's like, what better like tip is there than, like, I just saw him over there, so like I'm gonna go get closer to where I last saw him, or, you know, you know, better yet, if there's ever a buck that's bedded, I mean, by all means, get on it, like, get in his drill. It's like, you know, the thing with deer that, you know, I kind of even touched on earlier, it's like, they're not pronghorn, like, they can't really see that well. I'm not saying you can get away with just walking right up to one, but, like, you know, just using cover, using the wind to your advantage, and then just hiding behind cover. You know, it's surprising how quick you can cut distance with having no experience. Just using work or is it not? Like, is he gonna see me? And if your gut's telling you yes, then probably don't do it. But if your gut's telling you you can do it, do it. You know, and if that means crawling, 100 yards on your hands and knees, through tall grass to cut a bunch of distance, it might be worth it. But if you cut, like let's say you're on a ground setup and you're in pretty open cover, thinking of your guys' situation, really probably a lot of the stuff you guys hunt where it's like relatively open and you watch one, maybe chasing a doe or something, but he's out 300 yards. It's like you could sit back and wait and play the what if game, or you can just like get up in there and cut the distance. And you know what? A lot of times what I found too, and this is kind of helps with the feeling confident to do it and not feeling like, don't think of it as like ruining an opportunity. Because for one, I've noticed that when being on the ground and being like, even just to the most absurd things I've ever tried, like an example is in 2019 I was hunting with Grant and I stalked this buck and I ended up just getting to a point where I couldn't get any closer and I had a bad angle on him. I was up higher than him and he was down below in a river bottom and I was kind of up on the ridge, but I was only like 50 yards from him. I tried to flash him the decoy. I had one of those heads up decoys and I flashed him the decoy and he started kind of getting uncomfortable, so he pushed his doe away. Well, when he pushed his doe away, like all hell just broke loose and a whole bunch of bucks and does started chasing each other and it was like a rut fest down in this river bottom and I could see it all. It's all just open. And I just thought, well, like, what the heck? What do I have to lose? And like, I mean, in an instant, I made the decision that I need to just run out there and get in the middle of them. And I did. And I actually got like surprisingly close. I thought I got within 50 yards of a buck breeding a doe. It's just like, it's like, that's a situation where like things got super weird. I mean, I was ultra aggressive. I mean, almost unreasonably aggressive. But with that being said, I made that decision to do that. The very next day, there was bucks right back in that same area. Stalked another bigger buck the next day, and then stalked another buck the following day, right in that same river bottom. So, I think, reading the situation too, like playing your cards when they make sense to play, but like, if you're in a rut situation or you're getting moved around, bumped around during rifle, or even if you got a buck bedded early season, early September or whatever, like don't be afraid to just dive into it. And I guess if I had to boil it down to one phrase, I would just say, what do you got to lose? That's what mentality helped me get more aggressive.
And I think that's kind of, you can feel honored again. We kind of sit there and when we're thinking about it and we go, what would Zach do? And I think it's just kind of like the frame of mindset that you've talked about of just like, what have you got to lose? Screw it. Like, try it. Mindset. And like, I think this year we definitely have trying to push ourselves to be more kind of in that realm of things and try to do that. And so I think it's exciting to see where we'll go. We'll probably have more success because we are doing it that way. But I think for us too, we always get in the frame, we can do it tomorrow. So we're going to move on here, start talking about mapping our food sources. What is our first food source? What the article kind of mapped out as the first. Is it early season food sources or just food sources?
It said just food sources in general all year.
For all year long.
First one was Acorns, and we don't have a lot of experience with them. Some in eastern Nebraska, but we haven't hunted over them quite a lot or had a lot of experience.
It's not like it is in Iowa where it's like they're all over the place. Any woods you have in Iowa is like gonna have oaks in them and have acorns on them. Here, like you said, the eastern part of the state, other than that, we really don't see them. And where we do, they're like oak savannas, so then it's like not very good habitat.
That's what I had down. Most of the oaks around here, if we do hunt them, they're like oak ridges, but they're open. So there's like no bedding. So we haven't had a lot of success doing it, and then we just go somewhere else because there's like no reason to stay there.
Random one dotted somewhere, like where they might be hitting it if it's in the woods of a bunch of cottonwoods or something. But like where it's all oak trees, it's usually the habitat's gone from underneath it, and it's just not really a deery place.
Yeah, being that we tend to focus on bedding, or transition areas, the big open savannas don't do us a whole lot of good.
Yeah.
It's like I said, we just move on.
And even I don't know that they feel comfortable eating in a. Talking about oak savannas, kind of got off topic, but the oak savannas, they feel comfortable like going in there and eating when you can see from one end of the valley clear to the other end of the valley. And turkey hunting might be different, but
Yeah, and we don't really see the deer there during daylight. So again, that doesn't do us. We don't have, again, by saying this, we don't have a lot of success because we just don't see the deer there in this habitat because the oaks don't benefit, or the oak habitat in Nebraska where we are doesn't benefit deer being there, at least how they're managed on the public land anyway.
And it doesn't fit our style, and we've kind of mentioned that, hunting that type of oak thing. But like you hunted in Iowa with us when we were out there with the hunting public, and like that's different when it's all oaks and all the trees are oaks, and that's cover and there's bedding and there's ridges and different things. That's the thing here too. I feel like Iowa, there's like ridges and more terrain with those oak trees, and then here our oak savannas are like goes up like 4 feet.
Yeah,
that's a difference. And then there's a creek in the bottom, so it's like a kind of a different oak habitat, really.
Because I know a lot of people like focus on them. Like early season, they're like, go hunt the oaks, like in Missouri or whatever. And we've just never, because we've hunted in places that have had them early season and like tried it, and they just never show up. It just never worked. I don't know if we were just in the wrong spot. We didn't know how to hunt them correctly, which is probably part of it, but just never had any success actually hunting over oaks or targeting them or focusing on them. And then I think typically oaks are a early season food source. I know some of them, and some people say they'll come back around late in the year and eat some of the either white oaks or red oaks, whichever ones have less of the tannin in them. But other than that, it's pretty much just an early season food source for the people that are actually using them to target deer.
Mm-hmm.
The second one that, again, we don't have a lot of experience with because I think it's more of a private land food plot type of a deal, is like fruits or fruit trees. And on public, there's just not a lot of DNR planted fruit trees.
You'll know more than I do. Is there any like, I don't want to say natural fruit trees because it's all natural fruit trees, but like I know locust pods, like those kinds of things. Do you know of any of those that like are just gonna pop up in a piece of public land that wasn't planted by people?
No, I think the main ones would be,
or persimmons or something.
Yeah, like more like a bush. I think the trees, like you're not gonna get a wild apple tree. I don't think, not here anyways. Like a wild apple tree or a pear tree or anything. But like mulberry tree, you know, like the
mulberries. That's one we should mention.
Yeah, that's the one I've written down.
We've seen a lot of browsing, not just on the mulberries themselves, but the leaves. So I don't know if the leaves taste. Obviously, they eat leaves, but like the leaves taste a little different or a little sweeter or something to them. But like we found mulberry patches in woods that get hammered pretty good.
Yeah, and I can't think of any like other ones off the top of my head, but just like the smaller berry type fruits or fruit bushes seem to be more of what you're going to get fruit wise, at least here, like Nebraska area, because you're not going to get, like I said, most of that's, if you're planting a pear tree, it's because you're planting it, you know, either in your yard or for a food plot type of a deal. You're not typically seeing it
a random pear tree in the woods.
Yeah, on public, anyways. But
and then there'd be 7 stands around it.
Everybody would be hunting it anyways. Exactly, and then there wouldn't be any deer there.
You might go when you go farther east, though.
Yeah,
I think
where there
find those,
is more.
Because like if there were homesteads and somebody put a little patch of them, and now there's not there. But like like you said, preface it by
where there's more
in Nebraska.
Yeah,
you're probably not gonna find, even Iowa. You're probably in those Missouri and those kind of places. You're probably not gonna find random pears and apple trees.
Where there's more like that's forest area, so there's more trees. Like we have cedar trees, cottonwood trees, and hackberry trees, and
mulberries,
and a few oak trees, and that's pretty much it. But if you go east, there's probably just more wild fruit trees. But yeah, and mulberries was the one that I had written down as being like our big fruit tree, at least like August and September. Like that's when we've really seen the deer key in. Well, obviously when the mulberries are there and they're ripe, but that's when the deer really seem to key on them, like fence rows or
mulberries enter a lot of fence rows in farm country. I don't know if it's planted as a thing back in the 30s and 40s. That was part of their mixes, but mulberries are in a lot of fence rows.
Yeah, so that's just one thing to not forget about, I guess, is especially in Nebraska or this area. If you get a fence row and it has some sort of a fruit tree or a fruit bush or something
next
in it,
to a big ag field,
if you can find a way to set up on it, which we're going to try to do this deer season. Yeah,
tonight. Fence row
with mulberries in it, that they're eating the mulberries on the trail camera, and then
next to standing corn
and beans on the other side.
Yeah, so just something to not forget about or overlook. But that's our only experience with like fruits or fruit trees anyway. So the next one that he had down, and there was a question like on the article heading, is corn really king? And I put yes. From what we've seen, corn is definitely king. And I'm not sure if he meant it in a like a year-round sense or a late season sense or what, but early season, late season, I think corn is probably a pretty good target.
We just found there's an whether they're bedding in it or eating in it, or it's just creates another edge that they're walking down, or habitat transition. Like, they're associated with corn all year long for sure. That's obvious, but like we've just really started keying in on it more in places where maybe it's less obvious that they're like in that area. Like if they're going to be there, they're going to associate their movements with that corn.
Yeah, it's kind of a bed, food, water all in one, and it's something that we overlooked, especially in the early season. I think people know to go to a cornfield in December, but I don't think they know to go to the standing cornfield in September, and odds are there's going to be deer there. So that's just one thing that we've overlooked. But as far as corn, like really a key food source for whitetails, I think it probably definitely is. Our main early season strategy now is to focus on where the cornfields are and then go from there. Like that's how big corn is, at least here in Nebraska, for early season whitetails. And then things change when the corn comes out because that creates a different pattern. And then late season, everything changes too. But especially in Nebraska or any big ag state, your deer, where deer are, is going to revolve around corn, I think. Like it might be the most underlooked thing as to where deer are that I haven't heard people talk about is where is the standing cornfield and where is the cornfield.
It's a food source and a habitat really that are like they're based off like time. Like it's not there through the whole entire summer. Then all of a sudden there's this habitat and this food source that like comes from nowhere kind of in their eyes.
Yeah.
It's all of a sudden then it's everywhere. And there's habitat, and I can live in this, and nobody gets me in here, and like it changes everything.
Yeah, but changes how they, I don't know, how they live. Like you said, how they live, how they move, how they
like all of a sudden in Nebraska, like there's cornfields everywhere. Like all of a sudden there's 80% more habitat and more food than what there was a month ago, just like that. And it just drastically affects how the deer live.
And then when it comes out, 80% of that habitat's gone. So then it changes everything completely again, and you have to plan on your hunts just because the corn came out in a month. So the next one, green, like food plots. We don't have, again, another one we don't have a lot of experience with because it's a private land type of, typically anyways, if you're hunting over a green food plot, there's some on public, but if you're hunting over them, you're hunting with 8 of your friends. So it doesn't really, anything that we've hunted over. The only thing that I could think of that we've had experience with for any sort of green food plot is that sugar beet field food plot that we used to hunt a couple years ago, and like you can smell them, like we can smell them from far away, let alone a deer can smell them. But we saw some giant bucks on there, and it was because they could smell them, and it was a good late season, good green food source. That's the only thing that we've had, that I can think of.
There's no doubt it works.
Yeah, there's like especially late season or early season clover or anything like green food plots work. They're just on public land that we hunt. It's hard to find a green food source like that, but this one piece of public, actually had one that nobody else was hunting. But like I said, you could smell it. The deer could smell it, and any deer in the area was probably at some point in time coming to that sugar beet plot. It was just at what time. Most deer in the area are using it. It's just our bucks using it when you're there. Like our bucks waiting to use it. So it can be good, and I think they're not waiting to use it on private as much as they are on public where they're waiting to use it. Like, so it might be good, but it's just, are they actually using it when you can actually hunt? Because it doesn't do you any good if they're not. That's why we've shied away from those sort of fields and food plots on public land in general anyways, because we keep going back to it to try it. Like, well, maybe this one's different, and it never typically is.
It just feels like there's too many people there, or even if they're not, whoever's managing it is in there all the time doing something, and there's just always so much activity that they're like, I'm just stay away from there, just public wise for the most part. The big one, the final one that he brought up, or that's brought up in the article anyways, is browse. Like, deer are browsers. Like, that's what they are. They're not grazers like cattle. They're like not meant to go to that big green food plot and eat all night, and they don't. They're going to go to it, browse through it, and keep going. But if you've seen in our videos, anybody's hunting videos,
you'll see the deer walking and eating, or if you just notice when you're hunting, deer are walking and eating constantly. That's how they eat. They're not meant to go in one spot, stand and get, because they'd get attacked by predators if they went to one spot and stood for, a long 3 hours period of time.
Yeah, and it's like, not that ag's not important, but if you pay attention to, like, when you're in the woods and you're watching deer, they spend almost more time on the native browse than they do in the actual ag fields. Not to say that they don't spend a lot of time in ag fields, and ag fields are important here in ag country, but like last night we saw those deer, they were up on just a cut brome field eating more than they were even going to come down into the ag field and just eating grass and who knows whatever else they're out there. That's like native browse in marshes, in the woods is so important because that's where they're probably, I'd be interested to know for sure from a biologist, but like what percentage is native browse compared to soybeans. Not that they don't hammer soybeans and corn, but there's so much more that comes, I think anyway, from native browse. Or at least they spend their time, milling around in the native browse, where maybe as a hunter you have more of a chance hunting over native browse than you do over ag.
Yeah, and I think if you look at where you find typically the best native browse, that's edge habitat or swamps or CRP fields, which is where the deer are the majority of the time. If you start to really think about it, or even if they're in the timber, they're in the new clear cut because that's where all the fresh growth is coming up, because that's where all the browse is. Like if you think about it, it's like think about again like what the deer's actual diet is. It's browse, and that's where you find deer. If they're not on an ag field, they're where the best browse is. So like if you think about it, you can use it to actually help your hunting. Because I was thinking through it, and I'm like, where the best browse is on the edge, and that's where the deer typically are, and that's where we focus most of our hunting. But it makes sense when you put it all together.
And like most likely, if a deer's on its feet, it's browsing, because that's just what they're designed to do.
Yeah.
If they're not sleeping, they're not in their beds, they're up, they're eating something. If they're going, even if they're like, the rut's a little different, but like if they're going from point A to point B to get to an ag field, they're probably eating some leaves as they go. They're eating some grasses, they're eating some berries, whatever, as they work their way there. So they're always eating.
Yeah, they're meant to eat and walk and eat and walk.
Yeah.
Like that's what they're. That's what they were designed
does.
to
They're like
do.
grabbing a couple leaves, and then they're looking around, and they're grabbing more, and
there's not. You don't. If you really think about it, it's not. You don't see a lot of deer just
not eating.
Walk. Like if they're coming towards you, you don't see them just walking towards you. Like they're never just usually walking. They're walking and eating as they're walking towards you. If you really think about it, like it makes sense because they're browsers. So. That is probably the main food source.
Yeah, I was going to say, if it didn't say it, I was going to bring it up.
Yeah.
Because that's something that just, I've tried to pay more attention to, just to like, I wonder what's the deer doing when I'm seeing them? And it's like always eating native browse. Like they're spending, even those, when we were soybean scouting, we were velvet scouting over the soybeans. Like when we watched them, half the time they were in the marsh, eating whatever was in the marsh, spending almost more time in there during daylight than they were in the actual soybeans, just eating the plants in the marsh because it was wetter and greener and I guess tastes better.
Yep. So those were the 5 food sources to target, they said, all year round to find deer. And probably if you found any of the 5, you'd have some
What's the most reliable? I would almost say
corn.
Corn or native browse.
Corn or native browse, yeah. I just feel like
native browse is weird because it's spread out.
Yeah.
It could be anywhere. But yeah. Corn probably, if you had to bank on just one thing, one feature.
Yeah, but if you could choose the right native browse transition line, it probably could be, if it's close to bedding, it might be just as good as the corn.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of time, that corn is right next to a edge, which has good native browse, and you're putting 2 together, which is even better.
And a buck's still looking for having all those things near his bedding. So if he has really good native browse, and he can eat that, and not have to go out to the ag field, where he feels unsafe, and still has water and those things, he's probably going to stay in there and eat native browse till it gets dark. So it's better to key in on the native browse than the cornfield because he's going to feel safe eating that in the woods instead of in the open in the corn.